Yeah, so I have 9 hours on the memory card here. So we can really,
Well, I could probably chat for about an hour, I think.
I'm not going to chat 9 hours. School will be
Sure.
done here in a little bit. So,
Sure.
all right, John, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for making the time. Thanks for saying yes. It's always amazing to me when I email someone out of the blue and they're like, sure, let's do it. I always get a little more humbled each and every time because I literally have. Anyway, thanks for being here, man.
Oh, dude, thanks so much for having me, man. I love these conversations. I think they're really helpful and constructive. And so whenever I see, someone kind of reach out to me, I go like, hey, what good thing could happen in this conversation? And with the title of your podcast, I love, you're touching on something really important to me. And it's the importance of asking questions and creating a space for questions. And so, yeah, man, no brainer.
Yeah. I'm a fan of my title. I wish I'd come up with it. A friend of mine came up with it as I talked about like years ago. Like, here's what I want to do. He's like, you can't say that at church. It's like, you did it. I'm taking it. It's mine.
Yeah.
I've given him no money and I'm not going to, Josh. I'm not going to, because I know you will listen and you're not getting any. So tell people about you. So I'll tell them a little bit just for a primer. So as you turn on K-Love or Spirit FM or whatever, every once in a while, they'll play songs by a band named Hawk Nelson, which is your voice. Well, probably not just your voice, but your voice.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about you, but that's easy to just Google. So tell me when, like in a nutshell, where you're like, yeah, this is what makes Jon.
Yeah. I mean, my background, I grew up in a Christian home in Canada. My dad's a pastor. I started touring with Hawk Nelson when I was 20. I was the guitarist originally. I became the singer in 2012 when our old singer left. So there was a bit of a transition there. And then, we did 3 albums with me as the singer. And then over the last couple of years, I've been taking steps back from music and Christian music specifically for a number of reasons. And some of them were just that I became a father and I wanted to spend more time with my kids. And then some of it has a lot to do with some things that I was processing to do with faith and belief in God, and asking questions about my sort of Christian upbringing and Christian beliefs that I didn't feel like I had the strength to ask before. And that has sort of led me to a place where earlier this year, I felt the need to sort of publicly be honest about where I was at with those questions. And that meant admitting that I wasn't sure I believed in God anymore. And that set off a bit more of a domino effect that I had anticipated.
Yeah.
We had already sort of, when I did that, we had already sort of been tapering back our involvement with the band and our involvement with Christian music in general. And so I sort of didn't live under any illusions that I was the center of anyone's universe. And certainly I still am not. But when I came out and said that I wasn't sure I believed in God anymore, that struck a chord with a lot more people than I anticipated. And I probably could have seen that coming if I had thought about it more. And since then I've been on this journey of sort of continuing to ask questions about God and our ideas of God and different philosophies of being, because one thing I've discovered is if you build your entire life on Christian beliefs and then you get rid of those Christian beliefs, what do you do? Yeah. And how do you live your life, and what do you value, and what do you aim at? And that's a really big problem. And I've been trying to answer those questions for the last 6 months.
Yeah, So I briefly 10 minutes ago at a red light, which is actually when I emailed you as we confirmed this is going. I wasn't driving. My wife will listen. I wasn't driving when I emailed. Sure. Red light, that one by Target that takes 5 days to turn green. She knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I just briefly Googled you and just looked like the top 20 things. And when you posted what you posted, I have to think that you thought, yeah, this will get 5 people to comment and then we'll go on about Wednesday or Tuesday or Thursday, whatever the day it was.
Yeah. I thought it would create waves locally within Christian music. And then within a week, it would just be blow over.
So what are your thoughts on why that hasn't happened? Like
right.
Because it can't just be you. Like there's something else there.
So I think it's complex. I think there's a couple of things. I do think that there is, of course, the part of the sort of quote unquote Christian response to that this is something I sort of take issue with fundamentally in general, is that, oh, the media love stories of Christians losing their faith because it affirms the narrative that they're trying to tell the world, that it's better to not be a Christian. You know, like there is and when Christians say stuff like that, I actually do feel like they're finding something that's I do think there's a nugget of truth to that. So I don't think it's a completely unfair assertion, but I think it's really incomplete to say it just like that. So I think there is an element of the media are interested in stories of people leaving faith. I think there's a nugget of truth there, even though not as much as I sort of think that sometimes Christians play it as. But then I also think there's this cultural reality within Christianity that it's not real easy to publicly talk about your doubts and your questions. And this is why I think that the thrust of your podcast is so meaningful, that you're trying to create space for exactly that. And I know for me, in addition to being a part of the culture that sort of already was not super welcoming of questions, I was also a public figure within Christian music, which means that my livelihood depended on me continuing to hold the beliefs that I held and not, contradicting them.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was just like, I don't feel like I was even able to really ask these questions at all for quite a long time. And I think so many people out there, whether they're public figures or not, most of them not being, I think many people feel that frustration of like, I have these questions and I don't feel like I can ask them. And so when someone steps out and does, there's an interest there because there's just not enough people doing it publicly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I can't tell you how many people I get. It's annoying, actually. I'm the worst person at email, period. At work, at home, with the kids' school, with COVID, like my wife has to babysit me to make sure that, like, did you see the thing about the pictures and this and the testing and the drop off location? And I'm like, yeah, no, I didn't.
Of course I did, honey.
Yeah. I saw that they emailed me. I did see that they did send an email. Yeah, I can't tell you how many emails I get from people that are like, what about this? Can I get resources for this?
Yeah.
What about this? I said this and now I don't have a community anymore. Do you know anybody in the middle of wherever they live that will accept me and give me a place to do community with people? Because I've been like, I can't go there anymore. Like I've been told, don't come back because you're causing other people to have some problems or some questions. And we've got a business to run.
I think if you're told don't come back because you're causing problems, I think that you potentially should consider not going back, but not for the reasons that they're giving.
Fair enough.
I actually think even if you are a believer, I think there are plenty of Christian communities that are open and welcoming to people that have questions.
Yeah.
And I think to paint it as if all Christians are intolerant people who can't handle their faith being questioned is not accurate or fair at all.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. It's definitely a lie. Yeah. So a music question for you. So you did Hawk Nelson, 20 years? I feel like I remember them.
I think like 17 or something like that. Yeah.
Let's round up.
I was the guitar player. I was the guitar player initially, and then through all those pop punk days, really. Mm-hmm. And then in 2012, when I became the singer, we sort of transitioned into more of a pop oriented thing. Yeah.
Is that because of you?
I was really, actually, it wasn't my idea to become the singer. I had always sort of excluded that as a possibility because I was not like a pop punk guy, really. Like I felt like in the role of guitar player, I can play that role. I can, I can be the guitar player in a pop punk band, but I didn't think that I had the persona or the sort of like, just sound vocally to pull that off. And so, so when I took over singing in the band, we basically gave ourselves permission to totally reinvent the sound.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that enabled us to even consider doing it. I mean, there was no version of the plan that was like, yeah, we're going to keep being pop punk. After pop punk's days seem to have waned anyways, with a singer who doesn't do it well. Like, it's just like, yeah. And we played old songs, like initially for a while, we played old songs because we had to. I mean, we were writing new songs. And we very strategically chose songs from our old catalog that we felt like I could pull off.
Yeah.
And it was the first couple of years of playing some old songs, some new. It wasn't super fun for me. So once we had 2 albums with me as the singer, once we had that second one, we didn't play any old songs anymore.
Yeah, you had enough back catalog. So over those, let's just say 20 years, I want to revisionist history just a bit in your brain a bit as it relates to theology and God and religion and faith. So if the label or your bandmates, assuming that they didn't, I don't know, because this is assumption from me, had given more space for each other to write lyrics, sing about, if the concert venues had allowed you to come in and sing songs of you wrestling with faith, because I have to think it wasn't just the last few years. Like when I started to doubt, I've also done with, that's kind of the outpouring of this show was a long time of really wrestling with God. And at the end I had all this data and all this reading and I'm like, well, why would I hoard this? Like, how do I try to give some of this back? For me, it wasn't just today I'm doubting God. It was a long build up. So if there had been space, or was there space to kind of write lyrics in such a way that you could wrestle with things nightly, daily, in between music sessions, if that makes sense? If there had been a space, or if there wasn't a space, do you feel like you would be where you're at right now?
Well, I mean, I think to a large degree, market forces determine what happens in any industry, right? And Christian music is no different. So I think there actually is a lot of space to make music that takes a lot of different forms, but the sort of market will reward you or disincentivize you from exploring certain things. So like one person that I find really interesting is this guy, is John Mark McMillan.
Love him.
Who, so he's interesting to me because he's a really deep thinker. He's a tortured soul for certain. And he writes some music that's incredibly transformative and incredibly artistic and not your standard Christian stuff. But he can do that because he wrote How He Loves.
He gets royalty checks.
Right. So literally that one song was so big that I'm, to a degree, he's still living off of it. I mean, I don't know what his statements are, but like when you have a song that goes that big within the church for a number of years, you can live off it entirely. And then it'll start to taper off. I doubt he could live off that song entirely now, but regardless, it gave him enough wind in his sails that he could do other things. And so to a degree, it's like, until you have success on that level, you actually don't have a ton of freedom, and there's no like gatekeeper that's making that so. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Although you could make an argument for K-Love now, but
that they're allowing people to voice dissent.
Oh, sorry. That you could make an argument for K-Love now that they're so big that they actually are able to map the trajectory of Christian music as a whole.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which I actually think they are that big, and I actually think they're aware of it too, and even further, I think they're uncomfortable with that, which like I commend them on. Whenever I get a sense that they're uncomfortable with how influential they are, I think that's actually kind of great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I'm not fully answering your question, so let me try and take another stab at it here. I think that I think that as soon as you are putting yourself in front of people the way that you do in bands, all the rules are different. It's the same way it's like, does a pastor have the freedom to question? I mean, technically they do, but they're aware of the consequences, right? Yeah. It's like if a pastor gets up on Sunday and says, I'm not sure if I believe in the resurrection, then there's a pretty good chance that that pastor's not getting up the next Sunday. Right. So, there's, I think it's a sort of a fundamental just factor that's built into culture, and it's not anything that any sort of gatekeepers or powerful people are creating. So in a sense, I think you do have the freedom to question and doubt. It's just that you don't have the freedom to question and doubt absence of consequences.
Right. That's fair. Yeah.
And so I realize that's not a super straightforward answer, but I think that's how it is, more or less.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You're not the first person. So you're not the first artist that I spoke with. So I spoke with David Zock. I spoke with John Mark McMillan, actually, and then Derek
cool.
Webb, and maybe someone else that I'm not remembering at the moment. And they've all given similar answers. But yeah, I remember David's. He's like, yeah, I don't write songs for Caleb anymore. Like, I'm not concerned with Susan or whatever the name of the person's AR.
Right.
I'm just not, and I just can't. I'm not, and I can't, and I won't, and and everyone's given a similar answer, or not similar, but around the same corners there. I'd like to pivot to God a bit. So I read your Instagram post, and I've since then stalked you on Instagram. I haven't followed you because I want to be that guy that randomly likes things that is not a follower, because you're like me, and maybe you're not because you've got a lot more followers. Like, I notice when I'm like, well, why is this person even on my page? Like, why are they here? But maybe that's me, the banker brain of me, of who are these people? Like, why? How did they get here? Where did they come from? What are some of the things that you're currently wrestling with as it comes to your concept and view of God and faith, theology, all of the things?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that when I wrote that post, I really thought, because I had been fighting against this sort of, I had felt this pressure to hold these certain set of views for my whole life. As a pastor's kid growing up, there's pressure to hold those views because it reflected on my parents and my dad.
What are those views?
Just like Christian views in general, like traditional mainstream Christian views.
Gotcha.
About God, about Jesus, about salvation. And then, within the context of Hawk Nelson and Christian music, it's obviously expected that I hold those views too. And so when I came out and said that I don't believe in God anymore, I did feel a sense of freedom to being, I felt released from that pressure, which was really actually awesome. But then I was faced with the question of like, well, what now? Right. And since then I've been more obsessed with learning about ideas about God than I ever have been. I've read scripture more than I have in a long time. I've studied scripture more than I have in a long time. I've studied philosophy and theology and psychology a lot more, and tried to get a little bit closer to the bottom of this idea of like, when we're talking about God, what are we talking about? And where did those ideas come from? And one of the things that I've realized recently is, because I was raised in a Christian home and are raised with Christian values, and this is actually true for anyone who's raised in Western culture at all, it's almost impossible for me to extricate myself from those Christian ideas and Christian values. I mean, even the idea of human rights is predicated upon the idea that every human being has intrinsic value.
Yeah.
And that idea, was not prevalent before Christianity. It wasn't. If you study Roman and Greek culture, the idea that every human being had value, that was not present in that culture.
Yeah. Most people were property. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a sense of, I mean, we could get way deep into that, but I've really realized that there is that Christianity has brought a ton of value to humanity as a whole. And I'm not one of those people that's crusading against religion and thinks that it's like a blight upon humanity. I can't help but notice that basically no culture has ever arisen without some form of religion. So religion is serving a function. And before we just arbitrarily do away with it, it's probably a good idea to understand what that function is.
Yeah.
And so at the very least, I realized saying this isn't enough to call myself a Christian, but at the very least, I look at Christianity and I say, there's some real value in those ideas. And before we throw the bathwater out, we might want to know how much baby is in it.
I've never had anybody say that way.
So that's sort of where I'm at right now. And then I've also been studying apologetics and I've been engaging with a number of apologetic thinkers who've been very, very kind to me. And some of them have, become real genuine friends in this process. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of come to the conclusion studying apologetics that the whole field of apologetics hasn't yet convinced me that Christianity is true, but it has convinced me that it's a reasonable position to hold. And so those two things coupled, I mean, the fact that I think you can be an intelligent, reasonable person and reach the conclusion that Christianity might be true. And then simultaneously, you can look at what Christianity has given humanity as far as culture and ideas. And you go like, well, if it's reasonable to believe it, and if it's beneficial to believe it, then that's kind of powerful. Now, none of that indicates whether it's literally true or not.
Yeah.
But I'm still compelled by those two ideas of the fact that it seems reasonable to me, and it also seems beneficial. And so I'm almost in this place where I'm like, maybe maybe you're best to just go with it because it might be better. It might be. So nothing in there is enough for people, I think, to be like, oh yeah, Jon's a Christian again. But I certainly, that's where my head has been recently.
Yeah. Well, I'm personally, Jon, I'm not overly concerned with labels. Like, I think evangelical means something different. I think it means something political. I could care less about Democrat, Republican. Even the word Christian to me, it doesn't have any power.
Yeah.
It's a name and a way to categorize me in I think we're a similar age. So I'll just, in that Dewey Decimal System with the index card in the back of the library book. That's all that where I belong. And kids that are listening, that's a thing. Google it and you'll see how libraries used to work back in the day before the internet. So I'm not concerned with labels in so much as I sometimes struggle to call myself a Christian.
Really?
And I don't think, why
is that?
See, this is not how podcast works. I ask you the questions. So because that word means something. So in America, the word Christian means anti-abortion, probably Republican. I think that people have value only if they give money to the church. At least that's not what I say, but that's actually how I act and what I do, the power that I have. I'm more like when I quote Jesus to people and when I try to do things in the way that I think Jesus would have them done, I get overtly called that I'm not Christian. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I've lost the faith. So the way that people use the word Christian doesn't mean anything to me because when they say it and when I try to live it, those are two entirely separate things.
You know what's interesting is if you just publicly say that you're not a Christian and you don't believe in God, it's almost like you're resetting the spectrum of people's expectations. And then if you flirt with Christianity at all,
it claps.
Then you might hold a view that if you had never said, I don't believe in God, the people might be horrified about this view. But since you've already gone all the way over there, the fact that you hold this view now, it's like, well,
progress.
Now people like view that as progress. Yeah. So it's like you just need to go all the way to atheism and then work your way back, and people and people will cheer on every step. It's amazing. Well, except the atheists, they'll say that you're ignorant. But
you can't make everybody happy.
No, and most of us are ignorant in at least a few ways anyways.
More than a few. Yeah, I only know a handful of things well. Most of them are related to my family, and then the other is whatever book I happen to be reading.
Sure,
that's about it. The rest of the stuff I've mostly forgotten. What is your, I guess, has there been any flirtations with other faiths as you're basically like, I don't believe in a Christian God, because that's mostly what your post was about. Like, has there been flirtations? What have you gone after? What have you learned from those?
Yeah, I've sort of, I went through a phase where I studied other world religions, at least on a surface level, and then I dove deeper in some of the ones that that interested me the most. So, outside of Christianity, the sort of, it's called a religion. I'm not positive that it's a religion in the same sense as Christianity, but Buddhism is actually a sort of, it's, to me, it's less of a religion and more like a philosophy of life.
Yes.
Or you could say a philosophy of being. And there's a ton in Buddhism that I'm like, yes, I like this, explains a lot, and this is very helpful. You know, on the surface, especially, Buddhism is sort of agnostic about the idea of God. I mean, a lot of Buddhist thought would actually not be completely incompatible with Christianity.
Right.
Now, if you go deep enough, you get into the reincarnation stuff, and like that, I can see there being a disconnect. But there's a lot about Buddhist thought that has been really helpful to me. The idea of meditation, I think, is really powerful, and Christians are essentially engaging in meditation when they pray. And so, you know, there's actually been a lot of science that meditation and prayer activate very similar parts of the brain. The only difference being that silent meditation doesn't activate the linguistic centers, and prayer does. But you can also do, you know, non-silent meditation, which sort of does the same thing.
Yeah.
But I have this, I have this one sort of Buddhist meditation that I actually use a lot when I'm stressed out. And it's just these 4 phrases that you just repeat a few times while you sort of take deep breaths and you kind of calm yourself down. And it only takes like a minute. So I sometimes do it throughout the day. And the 4 phrases are joyful, energetic body. And you just sort of say that to yourself a couple of times, either in your mind or verbally. And then you say loving, compassionate heart. And then you say reflective, alert mind. And then you say lightness of being. And you just sort of go through those 4 phrases, and you think about them and contemplate them. And there's something about when you set your intention to those ideas, it's like your mind and your body sort of, they align, and they sort of, they accept that as an aim. And even a minute or 2 of contemplating those 4 phrases, I very often notice that I come out of it feeling a lot more peaceful. Yeah. And one thing I've found interesting that I've only thought of recently is that last one, lightness of being. You know, lightness of being, that sort of encapsulates almost all the other 3 in a way. And being is one of the words that I've been trying out as a replacement for God, as far as my own thinking, and going like, okay, like the way that I used to think about God, you know, maybe there's something to considering the idea of being itself, and being, you know, that term being used for like that from which everything arises, and that which sustains all things. And there's a guy named Paul Tillich who had this idea called the ground of being, which is sort of one way to conceptualize God. And I find it interesting that the word being kind of dovetails between that ground of being idea and then the Buddhist idea of lightness of being. So I went on a tangent there, but basically, yes, Buddhism is the one that I've probably found the most interesting. Taoism, there's a lot about Taoism that I'm really curious about and interested in. I read Tao Te Ching, and I feel like for anyone that doesn't know, that's sort of, it's not exactly a Taoist scripture, but it's sort of it's a good book to sort of sum up Taoist thought. And it's very, very old. And I understood maybe 10% of it. But what I did understand was pretty profound. So I think a couple of the Eastern religions have been the most helpful to me. But I found a lot of benefit in even just intellectually learning about Islam, about Judaism, about Hinduism, about Jainism. Jainism is very strange, but interesting. There's a lot to learn out there. And sort of what I've come to is that even within Christian thought, there's this idea that all truth is God's truth. And so instead of being scared to contemplate other religions, I actually often would say, like, to any Christian, like, go and learn about Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Go and learn about Buddhism. It doesn't, whatever is true will be true regardless of what books you avoid or don't avoid,
Yeah. Yeah.
And even as a Christian, I think you can have confidence that if God is real and he is who he says he is, then he'll reveal himself in all kinds of places.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I spoke with a Sikh the other day. Because I'm trying to intentionally. So I spoke with a Buddhist this year, a Sikh, and I'm trying to find a Muslim to speak with that I feel like will let me ask questions in a way that may be insulting because of my ignorance. Because I know, there's some people, and then same thing in Christianity, like they're so dogmatic that if you ask the wrong question, like that's it, interview's done.
Yeah,
this guy's an idiot.
Sure. But there's actually there are plenty of Muslims that are open to. There's plenty of Muslims that are open to sort of having those conversations.
I'm going to get those names before we leave. So not that I haven't intentionally saw it. I really want to do it locally. Like I want to talk to a person in the same room. And that's hard in the environment that we're in and in the scheduling for my kids and COVID and my job. Totally. It's just hard. Totally. I hate always doing this over Zoom. Now, in this case, we're on the different side of the continent, not necessarily just the country. So this has to happen, but you know what I mean? Yep. Yeah, but when I spoke with that gentleman, and by the time this releases, it will already have been out. Like at the end of that episode, I literally wrote down, I've got it written down right here on the desk of, we're not any different. Like literally at the end of that conversation, I was like, pretty sure I could go to his church and except for not knowing the songs, I'd be entirely fine. And I would hope vice versa. But the way that I live is really not any different than the way that he lives in practice. Which maybe I'm a bad Christian. Maybe he's a bad Sikh. Maybe we're both just decent humans. Maybe we're not. I don't know. I don't actually know that question.
Well, I mean, the thing that I think is that there are certain things about existence and humanity and reality that are sort of just objectively true. Mm-hmm. And it shouldn't be a surprise then that any religion that survives to be, meaningful to a large number of people is going to have elements of those same things. Otherwise it just wouldn't work. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it comes back to like religions only survive if they do something, if they provide motivation for something that's meaningful, or if they provide comfort for, if they're providing you with tools to face the suffering of existence, which is one of the primary functions of religion, I think.
Yeah. So quick questions, just lightning round, if you will. And I don't ever do lightning rounds, but for some reason. So also, John, I don't script these. So the questions are right off the head. So I try to make it as close to us grabbing a beer if possible, assuming.
Hey, I like that.
I definitely drink. I don't know if you do, but I can't do this while I drink. But
right. Yeah. I've done both ways. I've done interviews with a beer in hand, especially if it's audio only. And I've come to the realization that I might think I'm better with a beer in hand, but I don't think I objectively am better.
So I after the debate, I got on Xbox with a couple friends of mine. I don't even think I played, but mostly I just wanted someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Apparently hilarious, and I don't believe I was drunk. However, it was one of those things where they were like, "Who are you? Like your jokes are funnier, and you're being really mean to person A, B, or C." And I'm like, well, I mean, he's being a punk, so there's no way I could do this in a respectful manner and do it. But the weeds, I love the weeds. So I'm a 5 on the Enneagram. I like every linked article that I can find to that one word that really doesn't matter for the whole paper, but I want all of the data. So just quick yes or no question. So is heaven a real place?
I don't know.
Is hell?
I think it's here now.
Perfect.
I know that's not yes or no, but those are really hard to answer yes or no. I would say heaven and hell are both here now for sure. And in eternity, I have no idea.
Fair enough. The Quran, the Bible, the Torah, any other book that I can't pronounce from a different faith, equal value, or is one superior, or none of value at all outside of philosophical?
I think they're certainly all worth studying. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel qualified I think the Bible is the most remarkable document in human history, and everything outside of that, I don't feel qualified to. I probably am not even qualified to say that, but that's my current impression. But I think they're all worth studying. Absolutely.
Yeah, fair enough. Also, yeah. So I don't disagree with you on heaven or hell. I have no more lightning round questions to ask. Mostly because when you said heaven and hell are here and now, I'm curious what you mean by that. But let me tell you a bit about what I think hell is. So I think hell is something that you and I actively create by intentionally making decisions that break community and compassion and shalom. Like, we're creating it. It's not a place I go to, it's a place I'm making. Place that I'm making. And I think the same thing for heaven. Like, that's what the kingdom is you and I generating something, creating something. And hell is the inverse of that for right now. I could care less where I go when I die, because existential questions don't hold much weight over me. But
sure.
What do you think those two are?
Well, I'm amazed that you're able to say that existential questions don't hold much weight over you, because I feel like they guide my existence. I feel like I'm obsessed with them. But yeah, I fundamentally agree with you on heaven and hell. I have zero data that I trust on the afterlife, right? Because it's like, how do I know?
Right.
So tabling that, do I believe in heaven and hell in a sense right now? I mean, what I'm fascinated by is if you go back and you read the sayings attributed to Jesus in the Gospels, he talks a lot about the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. If you read that as talking about what you just said here and now, scripture kind of comes to life. Because I really do think I'm with you. Every time we make consequential decisions, we're either making things better or worse for ourselves, for our families, for our communities. And if you're capable of getting yourself in order and getting yourself together such that you can make those decisions better, then you can bring more and more good to your future self, and also like yourself now, yourself in the future, your family, your community, your country. Like if you're able to do that really well, there's almost no limit to how far that can spread. And the same is true if you're making really detrimental choices that are damaging to yourself and to your family and to your community. And we all know people that are one or the other of those, that once you set yourself down that path in either direction, it becomes easier and easier and easier to keep walking that out. And so that's become one of the guiding principles for me, is going like, okay, I don't know about the metaphysics of God and was Jesus resurrected? I'm not sure, but I do know concretely that I'm capable of making choices that make life better or worse for myself, my family, my community, and so on.
Yeah.
And so whichever direction I choose to go in, it seems to me that pursuing God in a way is a description of trying to choose that path of goodness towards the people, not towards yourself and yourself in the future and your family and so on. So yeah, I think that heaven is expressed as the ultimate ideal of that one, the destination lying at the end of that one path, and hell being the sort of destination lying at the end of that other path.
Yeah.
And when I study the 20th century and Auschwitz and the Soviet gulags and the probable 100 million people that were killed by Mao's communist regime in China that we never hear about. Yeah, it's hard not to believe in hell when you read about that stuff.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Although that would be one of the things on my list of people would say I'm not a Christian. Like, I don't fit into the label anymore because I don't believe in some fiery pit. There's actually someone posted a picture, I think, on Facebook today at Gehenna in Israel. And the sign literally says in Hebrew, there are no fires here. Like, none. Enjoy your stay. See what you want to see. Take your pictures. But just FYI, there's no fires here. Yeah. I'm curious, what has the impact been on your family? Your
Yeah,
kids, and of all of this madness that I'm participating in now.
sure.
What has the impact been for your family?
Yeah, I mean, well, my wife has been on a very similar journey to me, which I'm grateful for because I know a lot of people that have sort of gone through this process of deconstruction in their faith, and maybe their spouse wasn't on board, and that
Hmm.
caused some problems,
Yeah.
I'm grateful that that wasn't the case for us. I mean, my wife and I are both pastors' kids. We have very similar baggage.
Yes.
Yeah, my kids are 3 and 2, so they're not quite articulating these things yet, but there's, I think the fact that our kids are with us and that we're conscious of our responsibility to raise them, has put fuel on this particular fire, because it's caused both my wife and I to be like, well, man, we need to know what we believe, because our kids before too long are going to start asking questions,
Mm.
and they're going to notice that all of their cousins go to church and we don't.
You said your
you
kids are
know
3 and 1. Is that what you said?
3 and 2. Mm-hmm.
3 and 2. Well, I will tell you. So mine are 11, 8, and 5, and they do start asking questions.
Yeah.
And between the made up questions that they sometimes get from their friends and their friends' parents, and my wife and I just straight up say, I don't know. Some people say this, some people say this, and I have no idea.
Yep.
And for the most part, they leave it alone. They're like, okay. I'm like, it's bigger than I know how to answer, buddy. Like, I don't know. And if somebody tells you they do, they're a liar, because they also know. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good approach. I actually, I went to therapy quite a bit last year when I was in the middle of dealing with this stuff privately before I sort of became public about it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the issues that kept coming up in my therapy sessions was this pressure I felt to present my kids with a coherent worldview, because I had felt like my parents had done that for me. Now, of course, I was questioning it and sort of doubting the worldview they handed me, but I saw the value in they created a stability for me in my youth, that was centered around this Christian worldview. And I think that's worth something. And so I was sort of like struggling with, what coherent worldview am I going to present my kids with?
Yeah.
And I said this thing to my therapist, and I said, I want to do it right. Like parenting, I want to do it right. And she just said, do you think there's such a thing? And I thought about that for a while. And my response to her was, well, I think there's such a thing as doing it wrong. But the only conclusion I could come to is that instead of trying to figure out God entirely and present this idea of God to my kids and have that be the foundation of their confidence and stability in life, that I probably am going to have to make sure that my wife and I, personally and specifically, are creating their foundation of stability and confidence in life. That I may not be able to say with confidence that I know exactly who God is or what God is,
Mm-hmm.
but I can say with confidence that as long as I'm able to, I will be right here. I'm on your side. I've got your back, and I believe in you. And that's not nothing. And so that's sort of the approach that my wife and I are taking right now. And just like you said, when we start getting to the point where they can articulate, questions about religion or faith or whatever, there's going to be a lot of us saying, we're actually not sure about that. Here's some things that some people believe, and here's some things some other people believe. And I don't know, like, what do you think? And using it as a jump off point for them to develop their own thoughts about things, rather than me trying to strictly controlling, everything that they might come to believe.
Yeah. Another question before that, though, let me clarify something I said a minute ago, because I feel like some people will hear it and be like, wait, what did he say? So when I said that existential questions about where I'm going when I die really don't matter to me, it's for a couple of reasons. So logically, I was somewhere before I was in this bald head, and I'm fine with that. And I don't think anybody knows what happens when we die, but I know that if there's a God, it's probably a loving one, or it doesn't matter. So
yes,
I'm not all that worried about that either, because I can't affect either one of those. So it's not that it's not an important thing to talk about. It's that I don't really have any input in it being right or wrong. And I don't know that if I don't like, it doesn't matter because of that. That's why I say it doesn't matter. Not that it's not worth thinking about.
No, I actually really agree with you, because that's how I answer the question when someone asks me, am I worried about going to hell? That's how I answer that question. I just say, no, not in the slightest, because to me, either the concept of the traditional Christian concept of hell, I suspect does not exist, because it's not, to me, congruent with a loving God.
It's not really congruent with the early church either, however, but
right. And you know, even within scripture, I mean, there's this book that I really love called "And Her Gates Will Never Be Shut" by Bradley Jersak.
Yep.
And it details, three different views that you could hold within Christianity of what hell might be. And, you know, infernalism would be, you know, eternal conscious torment. And then annihilationism is just that hell just means you cease to exist. Yeah. And then universalism, which is the idea that in the end, God reconciles everyone to himself, which there's actually a lot of scriptural basis for. Yeah. And of course, I look at universalism and I go like, well, that's the one I would prefer. And then anyone who wants to disagree with me, I would say, well, why don't you want that one?
That's a good question.
You know? So yeah, with the hell thing, I typically say, like, I think hell either doesn't exist or there's basically no version that I can find plausible where hell, as far as eternal conscious torment, exists. I can't find it plausible. So I'm not worried about it.
I agree. I think I was recording, at least for the unedited version of the show before, but before we got started, you had said, you know, there are things now that you're slightly different with than you were, I guess, at the beginning of all this madness in May, or even like a year ago. What are some of those things where you're like, here's where I was and here's where I'm at now?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about them a little bit, but the idea that Christianity has contributed so much to the culture that I'm a part of, that is something, it's a more of a newer realization. The pairing of the fact that I think Christianity is potentially better than like holding Christian beliefs might be better than might be more beneficial than sort of naturalistic beliefs. Like put it this way, like I would rather a loving God than no God at all. And I would rather, even if that God is mysterious, which if he is real, he definitely is mysterious. I would rather be a part of a larger story than a part of no story. And I would rather believe that that story is going somewhere good than nowhere at all. Yeah. And so in that sense, like, I think there's a lot about Christianity that's better than being an atheist or a naturalist or a reductive physicalist or whatever. And so you compare that idea of it being beneficial, you pair that with the idea that it's actually intellectually reasonable to hold that view. I mean, those two things together are powerful, and that's a realization I've only come to in the last couple of weeks. Yeah. And it's certainly a long ways off from actually believing, but it's more than I had a few months ago. Yeah. No, it's honest. I like that. I like honest answers are the best ones. They're the only ones. They're the only ones that matter. So this is the question I asked you about at the beginning, and then I'll wrap you back up and give you back to your family. So, and we probably danced around it, but we'll just nutshell. So when you, Jon, say, if there's God, here's what I'm trying to say. Like, this is what that is. These are the words that I'm trying to wrap around whatever that is. What's the answer? Yeah. So my favorite book of all time is The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. And I went back and read it again about a week ago. And for those of your listeners that haven't read it before, are not familiar, it's not a big book. It's pretty small, and it's basically the story of it's this fictitious story of a dream that C.S. Lewis had. It didn't actually happen, but he tells it as if it was a dream. And in it, basically, people in a version of hell, which is not very hellish, it's just sort of a version of humanity almost, or earth. And these people get a chance to ride a bus up to heaven. But when they get to heaven, they find that their bodies are insubstantial and they, you know, that heaven is this place that's so real that these people that are visiting it can't even exist there without pain, because, you know, there are these like insubstantial bodies that aren't able to influence the matter in heaven. So like blades of grass are like knives, and like drops of rain are like bullets. And each of the people has the opportunity to stay, and gradually they would become more substantial and acclimatized to heaven. They're free to do that, or they're free to go back to hell, basically. And what's interesting is you're privy to all these conversations, and in each one of them, there's something that's preventing this person from staying in heaven. And it's always, always, always them holding on to an idea that no longer works, but they refuse to let it go. And it sort of paints this picture that your own stubbornness is the only thing preventing you from being in heaven, from experiencing heaven. And that image is so powerful to me, because I've had this thought of like, if God is real, I don't want to be so stubborn that I miss it. You know, if there's a way of being that's better than my current sort of way of being, then I want to know about it, and I want to learn about it, and I want to be open to it, and not just reject it because I'm stubborn. And so I've started, I mentioned it earlier in our conversation, but I've started referring to God as being, because the word God has so many hangups for me and so much history, that I'm kind of going like, what if I think of God as being itself? And I also have started using the pronoun she or her, because not because I actually think God is female, or being is female, but because, although you can make an argument for that's a whole other conversation. But I'm trying to shake up these preconceived notions of God.
Yes.
And allow myself to be open to things that I hadn't considered before. So one of the things that I've been saying a lot recently, and my wife and I've talked about this a lot, is that I've said, I'm ready to submit to being. And what that means to me, it sort of comes out of that idea of the great divorce. Like, I don't want to be so stubborn that I miss goodness. I don't want to be so obsessed with one form of what I think is goodness that I miss this vast sea of goodness. And the only way you get to experience all of it is if you submit. And if you let your preconceived notions go when you're presented with something new, you don't hold on to the old so tightly that you can't see it. And so my idea of God right now is being itself. And I'm on this journey where I'm constantly saying, I want to submit to being, whatever that looks like. And it's sort of a form of saying, like, I'm ready to believe in whatever God is really there, you know? And that's right now, I feel like the best thing that I've got going for me, right? Like, I don't know. There's so much I don't know about God and what's real about him or her or it. But being itself, like, I had this thought. I know this is way longer than probably you wanted on this question, but it's a good question. It's a good jumping off point for this. But I had this thought that, you know, you mentioned this earlier, and I really agree with it. I think that our deepest held beliefs are the ones that we act out regardless of what we say. So it almost doesn't even matter what we say, we believe. It's like, watch someone, watch them, and you'll know what they believe. And so I noticed that by the very nature of continuing to live, not ending my own life, and bringing children into the world and hoping that they live too, I'm actually affirming being. Like, I'm saying that it's worth it to be here. I'm saying that it's better to exist than not to exist, as far as I know. And and so in that sense, it's like, yeah, there's suffering in the world, but obviously I believe that being is still worth it. And so whatever that being is more good than not.
Hmm.
And I feel like I'm ready to trust that and submit to that being, whatever she is.
Hmm. Hmm. I like that. I like that. And then just also, nobody's given anywhere close to remotely the same answer to that question all year.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I find myself, I don't want to continue to ask that question for January's episodes and February's and March, but I have no idea. I really like having a common thread of questions that run through every episode.
Sure.
I don't know why though. I don't have a reason why. I just kind of like it. Maybe it's because I know I'm going to have at least one question that I'm going to ask.
Sure. It gives you some confidence. I've got a tent pole waiting at the end for you.
Absolutely. I have something to go home with. Yeah. So we haven't really talked about a lot of what you do now. So point people to where they should go to do whatever you want them to do at the end of this. They're like, yeah, I don't really care to listen to the music of Hawk Nelson, although there's nothing wrong with the music of Hawk Nelson. Full disclosure, John, I've never been a big fan of Hawk Nelson, but that's okay.
Hey, fine with me, man.
Yeah, I have eclectic music taste. Today I've only listened to Cumbia, and yesterday was only Johnny Cash, and then the day before was Big Bill Brunzi. I try to, I don't know, Big Bill Brunzi is the man. Somebody should give that man a posthumous Emmy, or Grammy, or whatever it's called. Where do you want people to go?
Yeah, what's funny is I know in these conversations, typically a guest will have like a book or an album or sort of something to hawk, and I have nothing of the kind. So I also find it really, really funny that, like, so my Instagram right now has been basically consumed by these questions and issues and discussions on this topic about God and deconstruction and faith and stuff. But career-wise, I do film work. And so I do, music videos. I do video content for other artists. I do a bunch of commercial work. Mm-hmm. And whenever I'm on like a commercial shoot or something, they're like, oh, like, let me follow you on Instagram, so I can see your work. And I'm like, yeah, that's not, I feel like my Instagram, if you follow me on Instagram, it requires a little explanation. But yeah, so for anyone who actually is interested in what I do, which I don't assume is the case, but the work that I do is the film work that I do is up at my website, steingardcreative.com. It's just my last name and then creative.com. And then if you're more interested in sort of my philosophical and theological wanderings, then that is over at my Instagram, which is just, at Jon Steingard on Instagram. And then I sort of have been messing about on Twitter a little bit in a renewed way the last few months, but then also discovering what a brood of vipers that can be. So,
but it's so much easier to mute people on Twitter. It's so much.
Oh yeah. That's fair.
It's like 2 clicks. It's totally.
Yeah. I've really tried to not block or mute anybody as much as possible on social media, because I really value dissenting views. But if someone's just going to be
that don't post anything, like you can tell when it's like a troll account, like they only follow people and they never post anything. So
yeah,
not humans, just the fake random bots.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. Mm-hmm.
So well, good. Well, I'll put links to those in the show notes. John, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for chatting.
Yeah, it's been a blast. So I'll end that there. Okay. How do I end this? I'm not the best.